Este 2010 será un año de reflación según Saxo. Las perspectivas positivas de la segunda mitad del 2009 se mantendrán en este 2010. Asistiremos a una recuperación de la moneda norteamericana, el mercado laboral seguirá con sus vaivenes y España probablemente no abandonará la recesión. Son algunas de las perspectivas que Blaabjerg, jefe de estrategia de renta variable de Saxo, pronostica y a continuación nos analiza.
First of all, I think the U.S., well, it depends on what you compare to the U.S., but emerging markets has definitely done a lot better than the U.S. lately. And in terms of investment, if I had any money, I would definitely look for emerging markets, especially Central Eastern European countries, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia. Also emerging nations like countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, South Korea, China, and in Latin America, Brazil. Currently, the Japan and Eurozone is both two regions in significant trouble, but Japan is, in all things considered, worse off than the Eurozone. So if I should invest, I would definitely choose Eurozone, and I believe one of the stronger countries within the Eurozone is still Germany. Germany still has problems, like all the remaining countries within the Eurozone, but they seem to be accelerating somewhat more significant out of this crisis. And in terms of Japan, I would be very underweight in an equity portfolio towards Japan, because despite sort of a significant or relatively cheap equities in Japan, I think Japan is facing another decade almost of deflationary scenarios, meaning that the equities will most likely not go that much higher. I think both in terms of real estate markets, both the European or the Eurozone real estate market has some further ground to cover in terms of maybe losing ground, and also most likely also the US. However, I think due to the special financial structure of the US housing market, that is where the big risk lies compared to the Eurozone. Lending standards within the Eurozone has, everything else being equal compared to the US, been quite more tight, which means that those who should not have had a loan on the mortgages for purchasing a house has not received one in the Eurozone, but has received one in the US, and consequently there will be more bad debt in the US, and that should, everything else being equal, lead to lower prices in the US. For Spain, it depends very much upon what your government does in terms of actions towards moving towards reforms. If it puts down a plan to this is the schedule, this is how we're going to reform the Spanish economy, I believe the potential output for Spain is significantly higher than the current realized output. But however, if your government does not do anything in terms of putting out plans on how to reform parts of the Spanish economy, I think it will take a prolonged period of time before you're going to see a significant recovery. I think the U.S. banking sector could be hit with another wave of default from the U.S. housing market quite significantly, because these option RMs is coming through here in 2010, 2011, and that amounts to around $3 trillion, which is, I mean, that's not pennies. In worst case, some of that had to be written off their balance sheets. What sort of is making me puzzled is that if you've seen the write-offs compared to now, if you compare the U.S. and the European banking sector, the European banking sector has only written a third of the bad debt that the U.S. banking sector has. So I think there will be more write-offs in both sectors, and depending on the U.S. housing market, I think the worst could come in the U.S., but the European banking sector will need to make further write-offs, I'm afraid. I think back-end consumption, consumer-driven consumption, will rise a bit, both in the Eurozone and the US, and that's good news. But unfortunately, unemployment is, in our view, going to rise even further, both in the Eurozone and the US. Most likely peaking in late 2010, early 2011, and then the worst should be over. I don't think it is, and quite frankly, I think if you look at, even though the markets are pricing interest rates raises in the second half, I don't think it's going to happen. I think both the Fed and the ECB are very well aware of this economic situation, and they don't want to sort of struggle a economy that's is fighting to come back with hiking interest rates. I think the economy will, in the Eurozone and US, will show positive GDP growth, and also in Japan, especially in the first half, because then you still have the stimulus effect, the effect from stimulus packages. In the second half, it's going to be a little slower on the growth side, simply on the back of lack of stimulus. But overall, I think that we're going to see positive growth. I think the major themes will be that the US dollar will appreciate versus pretty much all major currencies. It will sort of escape the funding currency as it's been in the second half of 2009, namely this US dollar carry trade will dissolve. I think we're going to see a reintroduction of the Japanese carry trade. Currently, Japanese bond yields is very low. And I think the euro will sort of depreciate against majors, except for the Swiss franc, where it is a total different case than the other ones. The difference between now and pre-Lehman is that mergers and acquisitions is not going to be driven by investment banks. Mergers and acquisitions is only going to occur if one of the companies, the acquiring company, has enough money on the balance sheet, or almost enough money on the balance sheet, in order to acquire the overall economy. But in sector-wise, I think we're going to see consolidations in the banking sector. Maybe it's too early in 2010, but we're definitely going to see a strong consolidation both in the European and the US banking sector, because this sector is in weak terms. A lot of banks are under pressure. And likewise, I think we're going to see maybe also a consolidation wave in European retail sector and US retail sector, because it's also partly under pressure. But in general, the M&A wave will go through any sector, or consolidation wave will go through any sector that is showing weaknesses. So the car sector could also be an issue.